turn green. Your eyeballs will pop.
War for Aryan Germans. I say it is time you inherited the nation which rightfully belongs to you.
The 20th century saw many changes in the world. Technology advanced as wars sparked man's imagination. Medical breakthroughs came every week. The knowledge of our own mind increased. These and more all worked together.
To Germany. From Alaska to Puerto Rico. All over the world, the United States Army is on the alert to defend our country, you, the American people, against aggression.
Look closely. We know it isn't a pretty sight, but if you remember what you see today, you will never again relax your vigilance.
But so much changed during and after the Second World War. At the beginning, we were still flying biplanes. By the end, we were testing jet fighters. All sides experimented with new technology and new ways of thinking. From physical engineering to biological and nuclear weapons, from the propaganda of the printed word to radio, cinema and television. The Nazis were leading the way in so many avenues. They developed weapons of mass destruction with the V1 and V2 bombs, and they experimented on tens of thousands of humans with biological and psychological weapons. Following the war, the knowledge gained from such experiments was gathered up by the Allies, including the UK, Russia, and of course the USA. But they gathered more than just the knowledge. They also fought over the men who had carried out the sickening experiments. Operation Paperclip was a program devised by the Office of Strategic Services and was utilised to employ ex-Nazi scientists within the United States.
What about you? You aren't American, are you?
I was born in Hungary, but now I am an American citizen. And I have seen what this kind of talk can do. I saw it in Berlin.
What were you doing there?
I was a professor at the university. I heard the same words we have heard today. But I was a fool then.
One remit of the operation carried out by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency was not just to deny German scientists to the Russians, but also to the Allies, such as the United Kingdom. Rocket scientists such as Werner von Braun, Kurt H. Diebus and Arthur Rudolph had already been classified as a menace to the security of the Allied forces, and yet they found new homes in the USA. Others found their way to Russia, and the space race began.
It's from there that the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth, which was little more than a few pieces of metal with a transmitter and a battery strapped to the top of a missile. But the world was stunned. Americans were dumbfounded. The Soviets, it was perceived, had taken the lead in a race for which we were not yet fully prepared.
The American ex-Nazis were given false employment and political biographies and removed from the public records as scientists of the Nazi Party. They were then given security clearance and allowed to work in America. Scientists from rocket engineering to medical experts were rehomed. A new world had dawned. The Cold War emerged between East and West, and nothing was out of the question. Propaganda was one of the main weapons.
One of the first lessons is that we should teach at all levels what true Americanism means and is.
Today, the latest weapons, coupled with the fighting skill of the American soldier, stand ready, on the alert all over the world to defend this country, you, the American people, against aggression.
The film you are about to see was produced as a troop information film, specially prepared to alert the American soldier against a hidden enemy, an enemy that can destroy morale, rob the soldier of the will to fight, and even trick him into surrendering. Enemy propaganda. Although this study of communist deception was made for a military audience, we think that you, the American public, will also find it pertinent and enlightening.
This material is just another sample of what you might call the communist war without guns. And this is some of their ammunition. I'm Colonel Foster. I'm going to be your guide for a short tour through the maze of communist propaganda. As for America, the Soviet people are told that conditions here are hopeless. In their theaters, the Soviets see newsreels made up especially to show the terrible truth about us.
This is America of the big capitalists. Wall Street with its big, impressive buildings. But this is the real America, where the workers live. Since they are underpaid, they must eke out a few pennies extra by peddling fruit on the streets. Almost every day in America, you will see police and goon squads attacking the workers who try to strike. But for the wealthy class, there is not a care in the world.
Did you recognize those old newsreel scenes? You know how typical they are of America. As for the Soviet soldier, he is also a prime target for the Kremlin propagandists. The Soviet soldier's head may be full of propaganda, and his ears may be ringing with lies, but he's still a soldier, and a tough one. In all his life, he will never hear the truth about the other side.
Are you really fighting for freedom? Do you not realize by now that you have been sent by the Wall Street merchants to crush Korea's attempt to gain independence? You cannot beat 500 million Chinese and Koreans. Our brave and heroic soldiers will never surrender. Don't let your capitalist leaders deceive you. Don't fight their aggressive war. Let all foreign troops withdraw from Korea. Go home and live in peace.
Well, every GI in Korea wanted nothing more than to go home and live in peace. If only the communists would do the same thing.
Yankee, you die! Yankee, we come! We come get you now! Oh, Yankee, you die now!
I do not say the Americans are bad, only mistaken. Where is this Soviet threat they talk about? Stalin is dead. The Soviets want only peace. So why don't the Americans go home?
Well, if you hear enough of this kind of gossip planted by the communists, enough phony rumors of America's secret plans to launch a war, enough big lies, little lies, and medium-sized lies, maybe you'll begin to believe some of it. Isn't there an end to this? No. There is no end. Not until communism ends, under the weight of its own evils and its own lies.
The best defense against enemy propaganda is truth. For a communist, a thing is true only if it advances the communist cause. It is false if it does not. The soldier who understands how enemy propaganda works is forewarned and forearmed. In this knowledge lies his strength.
Enter Project MK Ultra, the code name for a series of secret US government research projects directly influenced by Nazi experiments on mind control. The idea was simple: experimentation on the engineering of human behavior.
Now you may say, this doesn't concern me, or my children, or my community, but this is less and less true.
It was led by the CIA's Scientific Intelligence Division and coordinated by the Special Operations Division of the US Army Chemical Corps. Although the project started earlier, it was officially rubber-stamped in 1953. By 1973, it was officially halted, although a great many believe it carries on to this day. The project was highly illegal. US and Canadian citizens became test subjects without their knowledge and consent. Any and all methods were employed to manipulate the minds of subjects, from administering drugs such as LSD to hypnosis, isolation, psychological and sexual abuse, and even torture. This wasn't a small project, it was absolutely huge, with work being carried out at over 80 institutions such as universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. All the time the CIA operated through cover organisations, with only the very top officials knowing the full extent of the project. The Supreme Court later stated that MK Ultra was concerned with the research and development of chemical, biological and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behaviour. The program consisted of some 149 sub-projects which the agency contracted out to various universities, research foundations and similar institutions, At least 80 institutions and 185 private researchers participated. Because the agency funded MK Ultra indirectly, many of the participating individuals were unaware that they were dealing with the agency. It wasn't until 1975 that the public discovered what had been happening, when the Church Committee of US Congress and the Gerald Ford Commission investigated the CIA's activities within the United States. The investigation was in fact hampered by the fact that in 1973, the director of the CIA, Richard Helms, had ordered all the MK Ultra files destroyed. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act recovered 20,000 documents. This is the story of MK Ultra and the terrible crimes committed by the CIA that was supposed to be protecting its citizens. Winston Churchill warned his Parliament at the close of the Second World War that there was a more menacing spectre on the horizon: communism. The Russians alone had lost over 20 million people during the war, and their anger was raging. Kill every last Nazi, they said loud and bold. They had no patience for anything less. The sheer veracity of the Russian counterattack against the Germans left many in the West worried. Europe was being carved up, along with many other parts of the world. It was not an end to war, it was the beginning of something altogether new and terrifying. The Cold War began.
This is the Kremlin, citadel of Russian communism. Looking at Russia, we might see it as a country to be studied, as we study other nations of the world. Yet we know that Russia today is regarded as a grave threat to our nation, to our freedom, to the peace of the world. Why so? What makes it a threat? Looking closer, we see a clue. Public display of giant portraits of communist leaders. These leaders, by their actions, have caused the world to stand guard. Here, in Russia, you see the reason why so many nations are building up their defenses. Here, in Russia, you see the reason why we are spending billions of dollars in defense production. Why your family is paying the highest taxes in our history. The leaders of Russia tell us their only concern is the defense of their own nation. Is this so? Or are they ambitious for world conquest? The Kremlin runs all elections, and the outcome is always the same. If anyone dares to disagree, he's given a speedy trial without benefit of jury. Such traitors may be immediately executed or sent off to prison. The proletarians have nothing to but their chains. They have a world to win. Although the people of Russia gained little, the rulers gained mightily in power. They built up a giant war machine, looking forward to the day when their flag would fly over the entire world. Then came the rise of Nazi Germany, another power bent on world conquest. The two nations joined forces, and Russia, believing itself safe from aggression, launched an invasion of Finland and other neighboring nations. For the first time, the world learned that the communists were no longer waiting for world revolution, but were now resorting to outright military aggression to extend their power. After the Nazis turned on their former allies, we supplied Russia with immense quantities of military equipment to wage war against our common foe. And how did Russia come out of the war? In 1917, at the time of the revolution, Russia was already a land of vast area. Soon after the end of World War II, Russia had occupied many new territories, bringing additional millions of people under communist control, and serving notice that Soviet Russia was now a world power to be reckoned with. United with Russia in war, we strove to preserve that unity in peace. We helped organize the United Nations, which the nations of the world have mutually pledged to cooperate in fostering world peace and progress. Andrei Gromyko signed for Russia. But in the first post-war Italian elections, the communists created disorder in an attempt to gain control of the government. Once more, the world was reminded that basic in the idea of communism is the plan of world revolution, and that Russian communism has stepped beyond that plan to achieve world domination through aggression. In Indochina and Malaya, communist aggression has incited rebellion against established government. In France, communist aggression has fomented strikes against essential industries in attempts to discredit the free government. In Iran, the communists have incited rioting and have preached hatred and distrust of the Western nations. In Eastern Germany, they have openly opposed the West. In China, the communists have established their own puppet government. In Korea, communist aggression has come into actual combat with forces of the United Nations. And with the most deadly of all weapons available to the Russians, no peoples in the world can feel secure against this aggression. How are we meeting this challenge? Yes, one way is by helping the free world fight starvation and poverty and suffering, conditions that pave the way for communist infiltration. We are also supplying equipment for the free nations to develop their own resources and raise their living standards. Another way we are meeting the challenge is by military alliance with some of the other free nations for mutual aid in opposing direct communist aggression. And we are building up our own military defense. But do these preparations mean that we have abandoned hope for peace? No. In the United Nations, we are continually seeking a workable plan for living in peace with communist Russia. Because we want peace, but we do not want this. We believe in freedom. Freedom, born of the conviction that every person is a child of God and is therefore of supreme worth. For these people, for ourselves, for everyone, we want freedom, not tyranny.
As we have seen in 1945, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency undertook Operation Paperclip. The purpose? To recruit Nazi scientists, some rocket engineers, some medical doctors and plenty of war criminals who had been involved in the worst kind of tortures and brainwashing. From Operation Paperclip emerged several top-secret US projects.
I'm just an average American, but I'm an American. And some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil.
Projects Bluebird, Chatter and Artichoke were but three. The technical services staff sponsored MK Ultra, one of the most top-secret designations. Its affiliated projects were known as MK Naomi and MK Delta. CIA Director Alan Welsh Dulles ordered the creation of MK Ultra on April 13, 1953, and appointed Sidney Gottlieb as the head. Born as Joseph Scheider, Gottlieb had a PhD in chemistry from the California Institute of Technology and a master's degree in speech therapy. His club foot kept him out of the Second World War, but not from folk dancing. In 1951, he joined the CIA as a poison expert. He was to become known as the Black Sorcerer and the Dirty Trickster. He personally supervised the preparations of lethal poisons and experiments in mind control. The remit of Project MK Ultra was to create drugs that would aid in the control of the mind as a weapon against the Soviet bloc and other enemies of the state. It was believed that the Soviets, Chinese and North Koreans had used similar mind-controlling techniques on US prisoners of war. Known as the Manchurian Candidate, individuals would be brainwashed to carry out acts of terror or assassinations. The CIA wanted to use these methods on their own captives. In addition to this, they wanted to discover ways of controlling the mind of foreign operatives and leaders from a distance. Several plots were even created to drug and manipulate Fidel Castro of Cuba. Through covert research funding to universities and academic institutions, the CIA could create experiments without the subject's knowledge or consent. Many of the institutions had no idea that the CIA was in fact behind some of the projects they were undertaking. In 1964, Project MK Search was up and running, attempting to produce a truth drug in order to interrogate spies. A sub-project, known as Sub-Project 54, was a top-secret naval program using sub-aural frequencies to wipe out an individual's memories or wash their brains. It was supposedly never continued. There were over 150 individual projects, most of which we shall never know due to the destruction of the paperwork in 1973 under the instructions of the CIA director.
The purpose of this briefing is to explain to you what subversion and espionage directed against the military is.
As if to excuse the role of MK Ultra, the reasoning behind it was claimed to be simply a reaction to the threat of the communists and the paranoia of the CIA. The USA had lost its most powerful bargaining tool, its nuclear monopoly. Some even believed that the CIA had been infiltrated at the highest level. Ever since the disclosure of MK Ultra, there have been arguments regarding its purpose. Some say it was to discover methods of mind control, and others that it was simply to find new and effective methods of interrogation. Both seem to be true. An MK Ultra document from 1955 reveals the extent. It states the substances and methods they were searching for. Substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public. Substances which increase the efficiency of perception. Materials which will cause the victim to age faster or slower in maturity. Materials which will promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol. Materials which will produce signs and symptoms of recognized diseases in a reversible way so that they may be used for malingering. Materials which will cause temporary or permanent brain damage and loss of memory. Substances which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture and coercion during interrogation and so-called brainwashing. Materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use. Physical methods of producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time, and capable of a surreptitious use. Substances which produce physical disablement, such as paralysis of the legs, acute anemia, etc. Substances which will produce a chemical that can cause blisters. Substances which will alter personality structure in such a way that the tendency of the recipient to become dependent upon another person is enhanced. A material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individual under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. Substances which will lower the ambition and general working efficiency of men when administered in undetectable amounts. Substances which promote weakness or distortion of the eyesight or hearing facilities, preferably without permanent effects. A knockout pill, which can surreptitiously be administered in drinks, food, cigarettes, as an aerosol, etc., which will be safe to use, provide a maximum of amnesia, and be suitable for use by agent types on an ad hoc basis. A material which can be surreptitiously administered by the above routes and which in very small amounts will make it impossible for a person to perform physical activity. All methods were under investigation. The documents reveal that chemical, biological and radiological methods were sought out for mind control. A massive 6% of CIA funding was given in 1953 alone. One of the most popular drugs researched was LSD, and many see the hippie culture of the 1960s and 70s as a direct result of the discovery and unleashing of this powerful mind-bending substance.
It's very difficult today to pick up a newspaper or a magazine or listen to the radio without hearing about LSD. A lot of what you read is true, a lot more of it isn't true. You need all the facts.
LSD was isolated by Stoll and Hoffman in a Sandoz pharmaceutical company of Basel, Switzerland. Attention will be focused on the experiences of our volunteer subject, Bill. I'm going to give you this cup that contains lysergic acid 100 microgram. Will you drink it?
Lo and behold, with LSD, it doesn't make a doggone bit of difference how you give it.
EEG abnormalities in a clinical sense are not expected.
When I feel exactly what I know that I know what I'm doing, you see.
You feel happy now? Do you feel happy?
Yes.
Oh, you must be, because you have tears in your eyes. Is that a beautiful experience, would you say?
A certain number of people in this phase are going to have a convulsion, like an epileptic convulsion.
Destination unknown, courtesy of LSD-25.
But at just this moment, neither he nor I know the direction or destination of the trip we're about to take together.
Round, round, out of your mind. You think you're seeing things, I know you're blind. A million bright colors explode in your head. Today you're just high, tomorrow you're dead. Round, round.
There are currently over 50 research projects in progress under the auspices of the Food and Drug Administration and the National Institute of Mental Health, all part of our continuing search to discover more about the hallucinogens. The questions remain. The mind-bending drugs seem to offer so much, but what do they really deliver? LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, DMT, and the other hallucinogens, the mind-bending drugs. Do they extend the range of the human mind, or do they simply offer an easy escape from the demands of this world and time? truly broaden and increase the life experience? Or do they rather contract the user's world until it centers totally and wholly around the drug?
Due to the nature of the drug and the fact it altered the person's perceptions of reality, it was seen as the perfect drug to investigate. Administering the drug, they believed, would reveal where the person's true loyalties lie. A kind of truth drug. One goal was to attempt to make Russian spies defect against their will. They also wanted to find ways of counteracting the effect should their own spies be drugged by the Soviets. Almost immediately, the drug was administered to unsuspecting US citizens. Mental patients, drug addicts and prostitutes were amongst the first. As the CIA said, these were people who could not fight back. One individual, a mental patient in Kentucky, was given the drug for 174 days. But the CIA didn't leave it there. They proceeded to trial the drug on their own men and women, on military personnel, doctors, government employees, and unwitting US citizens. This administering of drugs without prior consent was a direct violation of the Nuremberg Code, agreed to by the Allies following the Second World War. In San Francisco, Marin, and New York, the CIA set up Operation Midnight Climax. This involved creating CIA-run brothels with prostitutes in the pay of the CIA. It was believed that men going to the brothels would be too embarrassed to talk about their experiences. Rooms were set up with one-way mirrors and prostitutes instructed to lure in the males. The men were then dosed unwittingly with LSD and the sex sessions filmed for later analysis. Several techniques were developed from this experience: sexual blackmail, field use of LSD, and surveillance technology. Individuals were given LSD, interrogated under glaring lights while scientists took note. If the subjects refused to give information or comply to instructions, they were told their trips would be extended. LSD can be a terrible drug. It affects individuals in many different ways. A bad trip could be absolutely terrifying. Those unsuspecting individuals being interrogated this way were often employees of the CIA itself, military personnel, and suspected agents of the enemy. There were also several heroin addicts offered more heroin if they participated in the experiment. From this experiment alone, numerous individuals suffered long-term mental problems and several died. Sidney Gottlieb believed the drug could be used in covert spy operations whereby it would be administered to enemy officials and affect the outcome of important meetings and even public speaking. To this end, he instigated a new set of experiments. LSD was now to be given to people in normal everyday settings without consent and with no warning. At first, CIA operatives tried the drug inside controlled environments. But quickly, field tests were carried out. CIA outsiders were actually drugged, with the so-called acid trip becoming a CIA occupational hazard. One operative was given the drug in his morning cup of coffee. He tripped, became psychotic, and ran around Washington believing monsters were everywhere. it was concluded that LSD was indeed a dangerous weapon, and only made those in charge more enthusiastic. An army scientist, Dr. Frank Olson, was given LSD without his knowledge. He fell into a deep depression and died after falling from the 13th floor window. An ABC TV report interviewed his distraught wife years later, who, like many others, believed he had committed suicide. Others believe he had been killed before being thrown from the window by CIA operatives. We will never know. CIA documents do reveal that there were volunteers who consented to taking LSD, and these individuals were singled out for more extreme testing. In Kentucky, 7 of them were given the drug for 77 solid days. We will never truly know the full extent of the tests. For all we know, there could be thousands of people out there who suffered bizarre lapses into an altered state of mind. People who thought they were going mad, saw ghosts, monsters, aliens. There could be hundreds more who committed suicide or entered mental institutes. And yet, for all the sacrifice, the CIA eventually ruled out LSD due to its unpredictable nature. They gave up on LSD being what they called the secret that was going to unlock the universe. It did remain a weapon for use in their war of espionage. In 1962, in joint operations, the CIA and Army had developed what they called super hallucinogens, and this led some academic institutions to withdraw their support. What happened next, and whether new drugs have been developed and used, we simply do not know. But the chances are that over the last few decades, these drugs have been developed, tested, and put into operation. Many conspiracy theorists believe that such mind control techniques have been used on world leaders, spies, and even popular celebrities. In addition to the use of drugs, electronic control of human behaviour was developed. Sub-Project 119 was funded for just such research. The experiments included the study and recording and analysis of bioelectric signals given out by the human body in order to understand how to control it. Remote control of a human was one of the priorities. Hypnosis was also studied in order to hypnotically induce anxiety, increase the subject's ability to learn, and recall information such as spying, and to understand the susceptibility of subjects to hypnosis. Standard psychiatric methods and drug-induced hypnosis were used. US citizens were not the only people used in MK Ultra. When researching the concept of wiping the memory of human subjects, the CIA went to Canada. Using research developed to erase memories of schizophrenic subjects, the CIA wanted to take it further and reprogram the mind. The research was carried out for a CIA front organisation called the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. The experiments were carried out in Montreal and involved inducing a coma in the subject for a week at a time. The coma victim was then played looped sounds or statements. These experiments were carried out on patients with minor anxiety disorders or depression. Most suffered permanent psychological effects in addition to incontinence, amnesia, losing the ability to communicate, and forgetting their parents. It was very similar to work being carried out by the British Secret Service, who experimented on unsuspecting patients and also caused long-term mental problems. The man in charge of the Canadian trials had actually sat on the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal and later became president of the American and Canadian Psychiatric Association. In addition to these experiments being used for the use of mind control, they were also very useful as instruments of torture. Why did MK Ultra supposedly come to an end? The American public got a shock as the scandal of Watergate emerged, and panic set in within the high officers of government. In 1973, the CIA director, Richard Helms, gave the order to destroy all the files on MK Ultra, but they missed over 20,000 documents due to an error in filing. These were later found in 1977 in a Freedom of Information application. They became part of the investigation into MK Ultra during the 1977 Senate hearings. It had been alleged in 1974 by the New York Times that the CIA had been conducting illegal experiments on its own people. The claim forced Congress to begin an investigation under the Church Committee and a presidential investigation known as the Rockefeller Commission. The CIA, FBI and other intelligence agencies were all investigated. By 1975, the reports were in and revealed for the first time to the American public that the CIA and Department of Defense had in fact colluded on experiments on unsuspecting US citizens. The remit of the experiments was an extensive program on mind control using LSD, mescaline and other chemical, biological and psychological means. Amazingly, Sidney Gottlieb, when interviewed, claimed to have very little memory of any project called MK Ultra. The conclusion of the lead investigator, Frank Church, was that prior consent was obviously not obtained from any of the subjects. A host of recommendations followed, and President Gerald Ford issued the very first executive order on intelligence activities. This banned the experimentation with drugs on human beings without informed consent in writing and to be witnessed by a disinterested party. Presidents Carter and Reagan expanded upon this in later years. Senator Ted Kennedy said in 1977, "The Deputy Director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign. Several of the tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations. At least one death, that of Dr. Olson, resulted from these activities. The agency itself acknowledged that these tests made little scientific sense. The agents doing the monitoring were not qualified scientific observers." It was not until a CBC broadcast in 1984 that the Canadians learned of their own role in the project. They discovered that the CIA had funded mind control experiments in Canada, and that the Canadian government in fact knew all about it. In fact, they had even donated $500,000 to the research. 127 victims later sued and each got around $100,000. On September the 28th, 1984, the US General Accounting Office revealed that between 1940 and 1974, literally thousands of human subjects had been experimented on by the secret services. The report stated, "Working with the CIA, the Department of Defense gave hallucinogenic drugs to thousands of volunteer soldiers in the 1950s and 60s. In addition to LSD, the Army also tested an hallucinogen called BZ, Many of these tests were conducted under the so-called MK Ultra program, established to counter perceived Soviet and Chinese advances in brainwashing techniques. Between 1953 and 1964, the program consisted of 149 projects including drug testing and other studies on unwitting human subjects. Because of the destruction of tens of thousands of documents and the uncontrolled nature of the wide-ranging experiments, it will never be known just how many people suffered and died as a result. The final report from the Church Committee had the following to say. LSD was one of the materials tested in the MK Ultra program. The final phase of LSD testing involved surreptitious administration to unwitting non-volunteer subjects in normal life settings by undercover officers of the Bureau of Narcotics acting for the CIA. A special procedure designated MK Delta was established to govern the use of MK Ultra materials abroad. Such materials were used on a number of occasions. Because MK Ultra records were destroyed, it is impossible to reconstruct the operational use of MK Ultra materials by the CIA overseas. It has been determined that the use of these materials abroad began in 1953 and possibly as early as 1950. Drugs were used primarily as an aid to interrogations, but MK Ultra and MK Delta materials were used also for harassment, discrediting, or disabling purposes. With the revelations came lawsuits against federal government. The Army and CIA had withheld incriminating information and yet also secretly given compensation to many individuals. They were covering their tracks. The medical tribunals of Nuremberg following the Second World War had forced home the need for laws on the experimentation on humans. The trials of the Nazis and Japanese were simply put appalling. In fact, it was the US military tribunal at Nuremberg which had established the Nuremberg Code as a standard for the world. It was this code which forced the CIA and military to go covert on MK Ultra. But the CIA military were not the only ones to blame. 44 US colleges and universities, 15 chemical research facilities and companies, 12 hospitals and clinics, and 3 prisons are all known to have been involved. Between 1978 and 1995, Theodore Kaczynski engaged in a nationwide bombing campaign against people involved with modern technology. He planted or mailed numerous homemade bombs, ultimately killing a total of 3 people and injuring 23 others. He became known as the Unabomber. From 1959 to 1962, he participated in MK Ultra experiments on mind control while at Harvard University. Many believe that this Unabomber committed his acts of violence as a direct result of those experiments, whether planned or unplanned.
Now, the barbiturates have some very severe problems with them. For one thing, they do produce tolerance to a certain degree, and it is necessary to take more and more of the drug to produce the same effect. However, this tolerance is limited. Now, under the effects of the drug, there tends to be a distortion of time, and of course the person is confused, and the person may accidentally take more drug than he had anticipated, forgetting that he had just taken a dose a few minutes before. In addition to this, the barbiturates, when withdrawn, do produce a physical dependence or withdrawal type reaction, and with the barbiturates is a marked tendency for the person to develop convulsions. Grand mal convulsions are seizures, and unless these are controlled, they can lead to the death of the individual.
The influence of psychoactive drugs on society was immense, and it is interesting to note that some of the key players in the hippie culture of the 1970s had in fact been participants in MK Ultra. Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was an MK Ultra volunteer and experimented with LSD. The singer-songwriter Robert Hunter, involved with the band The Grateful Dead, was an MK Ultra volunteer, paid to take LSD and other drugs. He claimed that the experiences had been creatively formative. The US fashion model and radio host Candy Jones claimed to have been a victim of mind control during the 1960s. The mobster James Bulger volunteered for testing while in prison. These stories and the fact that so much is unknown leads many to attempt to fill in the gaps. Did MK Ultra really end? Have the secret intelligence services and military really stopped experimenting? The answer, of course, is no, they have not. New methods of secrecy, new technology, and of course, the ability to test overseas all help to keep a lid on what is really happening. Without hard evidence, it is very difficult to say what these incredibly powerful organisations are really doing. The attorney for the convicted assassin of Robert F. Kennedy, Sirhan Sirhan, claims that he had been under the influence of hypnosis when he fired his gun. He claims that the assassination was in fact part of the MK Ultra program. The infamous cult mass suicide at Jonestown has also been linked with claims that it has in fact been a test site for MK Ultra. A known critic of the CIA, Congressman Leo Ryan, was murdered by members of the cult following his visit to investigate irregularities. Whether or not this was a CIA command is not known. The American actress and comedian Roseanne Barr came out recently and implicated MK Ultra directly into mind control within Hollywood. She claimed that Michael Jackson's own father had worked for the CIA. In her words from her website, is abuse of his own children was used to profit the CIA's programs that follow and study the effects of child abuse on the young, and how their minds can be controlled to such an extent and with such abuse that they can be forced to develop talent. Jesus said the truth will confound you in that day. Joe Jackson, as a child abuser, and Catherine looked the other way while he beat their kids and tortured Michael mentally. Keep them both away from Michael's kids. Roseanne claimed that she herself suffered intense trauma in her childhood, which led her to having multiple personalities and being manipulated by CIA-led psychiatric experiments. She says her problems were induced because the CIA is where they started, inducing it, after they brought all the Nazis over from Germany to run the American Psychiatric Association. Whatever the truth, this lady of Hollywood claims that celebrities fear the CIA, are in fact manipulated by them to control the minds of the masses. Plenty of celebrities adorn themselves with symbols of the infamous Illuminati, and the internet is full of YouTube videos showing celebs losing their minds, as if they had been somehow robotically controlled. Take a look and make up your own mind. The facts are simple. For thousands of years the control of the public has been part and parcel of those in power. From religion to brutal force, all methods have been employed. Control is not just about making you do something against your will, it is about convincing you that your decisions are really your own. Government funding of TV shows that show perfect American utopias, or control behind the scenes of our news channels, are just two simple methods that have been employed. We say that the Russian people live impoverished lives, while those in power have wealth. Look around you and tell me it's different where you are. We say the Russians control the media, silence dissenters, and manipulate the masses. Look around you. In Russia, they say the same things about the West, where we have non-elected royalty, media moguls, secret societies, and hugely powerful religious influences. Nowhere is right, but all seek to control the masses.
Greatest abundance of information any people has ever had. But survey after survey reveals an astonishingly low informational level among us. To be sure, the right to remain uninformed is one of the privileges of a democracy, but in a contest such as the one we are engaged in, it is one of the surest ways of losing our freedom.
Hey, have you heard about the crazy new way to send a message today?
Call it propaganda, marketing, or mind control, the effects are the same. The difference with MK Ultra is simple. Those in power decided to use the sciences to find new methods of control.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 59 Chevy.
Never in human history have those in positions of power seen the human being when making decisions. They see numbers.
Chevy just then. All new, all over again.
You and I are just numbers in a massive game.
We're gonna give you all another try.
Over 6 billion people on the planet, all controlled by an elite few.
Now that you've seen the new Chevrolet.
The power is immense, and so every avenue will be examined, and no cost too much to improve the methods of control.
Here's how.
Today, CIA observers say that MK Ultras does continue, but under different names. One ex-CIA officer said that the CIA regularly conducts campaigns of disinformation and that research into mind control continues. He said that, simply put, the abandonment of MK Ultra was just another cover story. The truth? Of course it continues. Of course new methods of control and mind manipulation are still being sought. Genetic research, new technologies, computer surveillance, control of all the media, including the internet, films, documentaries, advertisements, celebrities, academia, and so much more are all used by all secret services around the world, and it will never change. The only thing we can do as individuals is to remain individuals, to know our own mind, to question everything we are told. We either want out of the matrix or we're happy within. The choice is ours.
I've heard this kind of talk before, but I never expected to hear it in America. We have liberty, and these are not just fancy words. This is a practical and priceless way of living. But we must work at it. We must guard everyone's liberty, or we can lose our own.